So to our top story tonight, which is that breaking news on the scandal that is completely engulfing ITV. The disgraced This Morning presenter, Phillip Schofield, has spoken for the first time about his affair with a much younger colleague. There is the front page of tomorrow's Sun. He has told that newspaper tonight that he is utterly broken and ashamed, but he did not groom him. For the past 2 weeks, Phillip Schofield has been in hiding since the scandal broke, which saw him admit to cheating on his wife and lying repeatedly to family, friends and his ITV colleagues, including his co-presenter, Holly. Well, Schofield insisted this. I know the photos of us circulating on Twitter look shocking, but I am not a groomer. I absolutely know there is no question I did a bad thing. I was unprofessional one time in a 41-year career. He goes on to say, I did a bad thing. I will die sorry. I brought the greatest misery into his totally innocent life. Well, Schofield also revealed he's still good friends with the ex-showrunner, who is not being named, and says their 30-year age gap romance only started once the man was 20 years old, after revealing that it started backstage in his dressing room after one of this morning's shows. Well, let's have a clip in full now of precisely what Phillip Schofield has told The Sun.
Last time we had a conversation was when I texted Holly and said, don't reply. This is after the statement last week. Don't reply. You're probably not allowed to. But I am deeply, deeply sorry that I lied to you. And I am. It was the one secret in our sanctuary that was never mentioned.
OK, pretty bombshell stuff. Let's bring Thursday night's First Edition panel for their reaction. With me tonight, the economist Miata Fambule and the Conservative peer and the former Culture Minister, Lord Ed Vaizey. Ed and Miata, good to see you. Ed, let me come to you first. As it happens, you are indeed a former Culture Minister, longest-serving former Culture Minister. Television certainly came under your remit. Obviously, pretty interesting news that Phillip Schofield has decided to speak. He clearly feels he's got a lot to say. Your reaction, and first up, what does this change, if anything?
There are two narratives going on here. One is, as it were, kind of, to put it very crudely, and it may sound a bit facetious given the seriousness of the issue and the lives that have been really badly affected by this scandal, it's a crisis PR battle, and each side, as it were, is getting their story out. To a certain extent, ITV has got a story out saying it's all Phillip Schofield's fault. Phillip Schofield is now fighting back with a long interview in The Sun. But the other story, and the story where, as it were, the politicians, as it were, might have a role to play, is ITV. And as you said it in your opening, you know, this is a crisis that has engulfed ITV. This morning they announced an inquiry led by a very senior barrister, Janet Mulcahy, who is going to look into what has happened. And the question that lies behind any issue like this when it affects a business, and it's almost irrelevant that ITV is a media business, except for the fact that it's such a high-profile story, is who knew what when, and which senior people knew what when, and where will this stop? Where will the buck stop as this emerges? Because from what I gather, and obviously everyone is talking about this story, you know, lots of people knew about this for many years, and there's an age-old narrative that you protect, as it were, your talent, the person who's bringing in your viewers, and did they do that at the expense of a vulnerable young man? So all those questions have to be answered. And it's interesting as well that ITV wrote to Ofcom, which is the media regulator, and to the Secretary of State for Culture. ITV is going in front of a select committee in Parliament next week by coincidence, but it's relevant because there's a very big media bill going through Parliament, and ITV is a public service broadcaster. It is regulated by Ofcom via Parliament. So things that damage ITV's reputation and, as it were, its corporate standing are serious and are, to a certain extent, political questions in answer to those viewers who may be saying, why on earth would MPs even bother to get involved in this issue? So that is what is happening at the moment, and how ITV comes through that will be a story, I think, that will develop over the next few days and weeks.
Yeah, and in fact, Callum McCall, ITV's chief executive, is coming back in front of the Select Committee for her own hearing on precisely this subject the week after next as well. So it's a bit of a double grilling coming their way. Miata, though, let's look at, I suppose, the nub of what Phillip Schofield is saying tonight. And the accusation is he met this runner when he was 15 years old. He got him a job on the programme, and then he started a sexual relationship with him, which by anybody's book is wholly inappropriate. He then went on to lie to pretty much everybody about it. He is saying, though, which is, I guess, the most important fact he's trying to put out in the public domain tonight, that their relationship, although still utterly inappropriate because you have a very senior, powerful figure in television having a relationship with an incredibly young, junior, impressionable person, he was 20 years old when that relationship began. So there's no question there was any illegality there because, according to Phillip Schofield anyway, he was old enough to pass any age of consent and old enough, presumably, to know what he was doing. Does that change anything for you?
I don't think it does, because in the end, the behaviour was inappropriate and he concedes that himself. And in the end, all of this has to be investigated. For me, at the crux of this is a duty of care to someone that was young and vulnerable in a professional setting. You had someone that was incredibly powerful in that setting. It's whether that power was used in any way. And then the second bit for me is who knew what? I think that is the crux of the matter. What was covered up? And it's not just about the relationship. As I understand it, it's how, when the relationship broke down, the individual concerned was treated. So I think it's a whole package of things. And I think there's probably a lot more to come out. And that's why it needs to be properly investigated. And the key here is the reputation of ITV. Yeah. You cannot stand as a broadcaster with, complete respect and have the confidence and trust of the public, and then be seen to keep things behind and allow inappropriate behaviour to go unchallenged and unchecked.
Basically, what we're getting down to here is who at ITV knew what and when. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right, and that is Miatta's absolutely right, and that's how this story will develop, and it's about ITV's corporate reputation, and there'll be a business story to this. ITV's share price hasn't been doing so well in the last couple of years. And what will the board decide the measures? And what will happen, obviously, with this inquiry, we hope, is, first of all, obviously, that the facts will come out, and they may be perhaps even more shocking than what we've seen already. But secondly, that there will hopefully be a plan for ITV to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, because we are talking, and we're going to be talking about it again in the context of Westminster, again about an age-old thing of power relationships and the abuse of power. What measures can you put in to stop that happening? And it is pervasive in all walks of life, whether it's the media, law firms, or whatever. And will that pass muster? And they will, even though Ofcom doesn't really have a technical role here, because Ofcom's job is to regulate the content that ITV puts out, but will Ofcom and indeed the government agree with what ITV is doing? ITV will want to bring the government and parliamentarians, MPs, and Ofcom with them on this journey. But they've got to act swiftly. They've got to be decisive, and they can't take any half measures. They can't say, they can't try and get away with anything now. It's now kind of become the biggest kind of media story for quite some time, and ITV can only really start to come back from this by being full and frank and open, and it may be that some heads will have to roll. I'm not going to speculate on which heads they may be. I don't have the ITV organogram in front of me, but that may well be the case.
We can bring you a little bit more detail now from this interview in The Sun. Phillip Schofield says this about his relationship with ITV. He said he'd be not suing ITV for breach of contract. I guess that's not a huge surprise to anybody. He's certainly not demanding a settlement package either. He says instead, I think when you've caused this damage, you can expect nothing. It's my fault. I completely understand. That's not particularly surprising. It goes on to say one of the things that ITV have offered him therapy. He's yet to accept it and said he's relying on his wife, daughters and friends for their support. He also says that he did not use ITV money to pay for taxis for the man who, of course, then was his lover, saying, I don't have an ITV account. Speaking about his life after the scandal, Phillip Schofield wants to make this clear that he's a broken man. In fact, he says, I'm in a very bad way, mentally, utterly broken. I feel embarrassed and ashamed. I've just felt like I was going lower and lower and lower and lower. And then this bizarre numbness washes over you like a selfishness, his words. I do not think I will ever be able to walk down a street ever again. It is like everybody knows I can't go out. Miatta, he has done something pretty bad here. Whether ITV were complicit in covering up, we will find out. And obviously the interesting thing about select committees, you appear in front of a select committee, you cannot lie. Yeah. You can put out statements that might mislead the media. We don't know whether ITV had done that or not. But in front of a parliamentary select committee, you are under oath. And if you don't tell the truth to them, you're in very serious trouble indeed. But there's also a human element of all this. If I was in a lot of trouble, if Phillip Schofield was in a lot of trouble, I guess my advice would say, go out and say you're desperately, desperately, desperately sorry. Do you have any sympathy for him as a human being, or do you think this is another play?
Look, I think he's obviously really broken. It's mortifying. His career's in tatters. So at a very human level, of course, you will feel, you know, sadness. It's a life destroyed and there's another life on the other side of it that has been really badly impacted. But in the end, for me, there is a bigger piece here, which is that point about abuse of power that is far too pervasive, you know, across the piece. And if we want to stop that, we have to call it out, and there has to be no tolerance. And whether it's in the media realm or it's in Westminster, there has to be no tolerance, because otherwise you just don't shift the behaviour. And I think that is the key. And that, unfortunately, you know, on top of the lives that have been massively damaged, that's the bit that matters.
OK, we've actually got a little bit more video from the Sun interview we can play you now, them obviously talking to Phillip Schofield. Let's have another look.
My biggest regret is getting into a relationship at work.
To whom do you owe your biggest apology?
Everybody. Everybody. To every single person, I am deeply sorry. And I apologise to him, because I should have known better.
OK, well, this is interesting stuff, Ed and Miata. Ed, what do you think changes when ITV come in front of the Select Committee? Phillip Schofield, I guess he can say whatever he wants, but it's not really going to change his...
I think if I was on the Select
relationship.
Committee, I would give ITV quite a hard time, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because I think the tone of their reaction to this crisis has been to say it's Phillip Schofield's fault. Phillip Schofield says in that interview, it is his fault. Of course it is his fault. And by the way, I totally agree with Miata. There is a human element to this. And however appallingly someone has behaved, you've got to remember they are a human being. And what he's going through there, particularly that interview, which must have been gruesome, is not something any of us would want to go through. But I think I would be tough with them by saying you can't simply get away with saying that this guy lied to you and that's the end of it, and that you investigated 3 years ago. Because as I say, I mean, this is to a certain extent rumour and anecdote, but all of us who work, as it were, or are involved in the media, now this story has come to light for someone like me who didn't know anything about it beforehand, but it is apparent that lots of people working in the media knew about this over the last 3 years. And to me, sitting as an MP, knowing that, I would think, I'm not an MP just for the viewers' benefit, if I were an MP, would be, it's just not credible. It's just not credible that you didn't kind of know something was going on and you didn't intervene. And it is not credible now to say, we didn't know anything, we took him at his word, we did a bit of an investigation and we all moved on, because it's blown up and there's got to be a mea culpa at the kind of executive level as well. Otherwise, any measures they put in place to stop something like this happening in the future will not be credible.
What do you mean by a mea culpa at the executive level? Whatever has happened...
Well, I said earlier that I think
I
would be very surprised, and I'm not going to speculate who it might be, I would be very surprised if some executives did not get embroiled in this dispute and that heads might have to roll in the future. At the moment, when this crisis started, people thought Phillip Schofield leaves the programme, end of story. It is very obviously, pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 of tomorrow's Sun, it is very obviously not the end of the story, and it won't be the end of the story if ITV go in front of a Select Committee with MPs who will want to ask questions, and they'll ask the obvious questions, the questions all of us would ask, but as you say, they'll be doing it in public with the executives under oath to say, what did you actually know and what measures were placed and what actions did you take and so on and so forth.
OK, Miata, final thought?
Yeah, well, the duty of care was with ITV. It's a junior member of staff, and how they protected that junior member of staff, both going into that relationship, but when the relationship broke down, for me, is the key question. And that does sit with them, and that is what they have to be held to account. And if there are heads that roll, it should be because of that.
OK. Pictures now you can see of Phillip Schofield with the runner. He's being pixelated because he's not being identified for kind of obvious reasons, I suppose. We really do need to know who did what, when, how and why before we can start talking about his identity. There are pretty important rules in place in this country over why. Well, that is that breaking news tonight. Phillip Schofield has spoken to The Sun to say he is desperately ashamed, he is a broken man, but he did not groom the runner who later went on to become his lover.